Today I'll be talking about the FoldKB ergonomic keyboard from Keebio. However, before I get to that, I think it's useful to look at my keyboard journey to see how I got to this keyboard and what influenced some of my layout choices along the way. If you just want to hear my review of the FoldKB, I'll put timestamps in the description so you can skip directly to it. Now before we begin, I want to point out that this is not a sponsored video. I bought all of these keyboards with my own money, and I have no relationship with Keebio or any of the vendors mentioned in this video. At work, I've been using a Datadesk SmartBoard since at least before 2003. I bought this one in January of 2003, but it replaced another one that I bought sometime before that. Now this is so old that it uses USB 1.1, which is an ancient technology. For context, when USB 1.1 was released in 1998, the first iPhone wouldn't come out for another 9 years. Home Wi-Fi did not exist. And people were worried that the Y2K bug would cause planes to fall from the sky when the year flipped to 2000. However, despite its age, I love this keyboard. It has Alps SKCM black switches, which have a fantastic tactile feel. It has an 1800 compact layout, so it takes up less space than other ergonomic keyboards while still including a number pad. For comparison, the Datadesk SmartBoard is only slightly larger than the Microsoft Sculpt ergonomic keyboard, which doesn't even have a number pad. It is tinted to about 6.5 degrees, which is modest compared to some split keyboards today, but I find it very comfortable. The keyboard has some tilt front to back, but the adjustment feet are in the front and have 2 levels of adjustment, which lets you make the keyboard flat or even have a negative tilt. Very nice. It has an integrated wrist rest to keep you from bending your wrist back when resting, and it has an ortholinear key layout. Now it's not exactly an ortholinear grid layout. Notice that the keycaps get wider as you move away from the home row. For example, the 9 and 0 keys are slightly wider than the letters O and P, which in turn are slightly wider than K and L, which are normal sized. This makes the pinky fingers easier to hit. A consequence of this layout is that they had to move the equals key from the top right to the top left next to the 1 key. This was admittedly the biggest adjustment I had using it, and as I recall, it took me a day or two to get used to the new placement, but it feels natural now. I actually struggled to find this key on a traditional QWERTY layout. Having an ortholinear layout also means that the 6 key is on the right side of the keyboard. Modern ergonomic keyboards like the Digma Raise, Ultimate Hacking Keyboard, Mistel MD770, and Logitech K860 have the 6 key on the left. Having 6 on the right was not an issue for me because when I took touch typing in high school, and I'm old enough to have taken a touch typing class in high school, we were taught to hit the 6 key with our right hand. Now, by the way, Digma has a great video on their channel about their thought process for why they put the 6 key on the left. I'll add a link in the description to that video. The Datadesk SmartBoard is only missing 4 physical keys: the menu key, print screen, scroll lock, and pause. Of those, I have only used print screen, and even then only occasionally. It's accessed by holding the function key, located in the lower left of the keyboard, and pressing F10. The function key probably would have been easier to hit if they had positioned it next to the spacebar. That way you could reach it by just curling your thumb. However, I got very used to finding the function key there, so it didn't cause me any problems. And as I said, I didn't use it very often. There are just a couple of minor issues with this keyboard. First, the stabilizers rattle, especially on that split spacebar. Second, other than the mounting plate, the keyboard is plastic, and there's a lot of empty space. This means that the keyboard is loud and sounds hollow. I suppose I could mod it by filling the empty space with silicone, but I never got around to trying that. In 2020, when I transitioned to working from home for several months, I decided I needed to have an ergonomic keyboard at home. I was using a drop alt keyboard, which is not an ergonomic keyboard, but that was fine since I didn't use it for extended periods. However, I took the opportunity to try to find a modern replacement for my Datadesk SmartBoard. I did some research and decided to get this Xbose keyboard. However, I had a hard time adapting to it. Like the Datadesk SmartBoard, its keys fan out as they move away from the home row, but since the alpha and number keys are all the same size, this just means that the gap between the keys increases as they fan out. I mean, well, most of the number keys are the same size. Look at that monster 1 and 0 keys, and check out that huge backspace key. I also did not like the aggressive shift on the pinky columns. Note that the keys Q, A, and Z are much lower than W, S, and X. I found myself missing keystrokes. I also was not fond of these shortened tab, shift, and control keys. I usually use my left hand for modifiers, and those were often hard for me to hit. However, one thing I really did like about this keyboard was this extra backspace key between G and H, which was surprisingly easy to get used to. I bought this keyboard with red key switches, and I would do a typing sound test, but this is the first revision of that keyboard, and they've updated twice since then, so a sound test is really no longer relevant. Plus, that would require me to touch it again, which I really don't want to do. I eventually replaced it with the ErgoDox EZ Glow. I liked it and adjusted to it very quickly. The fact that the outer keys are 1.5 unit makes them very easy to hit with your pinky. However, the ErgoDox EZ is quite thick, and the wing wrist rests do not tent with the keyboard. They just sit flat on your desk, and this is my biggest gripe with it. It is also hollow, so the keys are loud. The ErgoDox uses QMK firmware, and I was able to configure the layout to make it easier for me to use. So of course I put the equals key at the top left next to 1. I also followed a lot of other layouts and made the key next to A dual function. Tap it for escape or hold it for control. This was very comfortable for me since my pinky didn't have to stretch all the way to the bottom corner of the keyboard, and you'll see that I used the same position on other keyboards. Since the quote key is on the far right, I had to put enter on the bottom right. I tried putting it on the left thumb key, but that was used often enough for space that it just didn't work for me. I put the function key on the left thumb cluster. I usually use my left hand for modifiers, and this includes the function key, so this felt natural for me. I put the backspace key on the right thumb cluster, which was very convenient, but I also put a second backspace key next to H, since I liked that key there on the Xbo's keyboard. However, after some use, I decided that the ErgoDox has too many keys. Those duplicate backspace keys are just one sign of that. And note that I put switch blockers on the keys below V and M because I kept accidentally hitting them. I also found that these inner keys were awkward to use. I eventually built a Keebio Iris keyboard, which I liked a lot. I borrowed a lot of my key layout from the ErgoDox, so the enter key is at the bottom right, the dual function escape and control key is next to A, and of course the equals key is at the top left. It only has one set of thumb keys, so I lost that function key on the thumb cluster. So instead, I made a couple of keys dual function. For example, holding left space accessed a layer with my navigation keys on my right hand. I also moved backspace next to P. The Plank keyboard does this, and it's really nice. Instead of having to move my hand 2 rows above the home row, I just had to reach up and to the right to hit backspace. Thankfully, all these changes were easy to do with QMK. One of the nice things about the Iris is that compatible keycaps are pretty easy to find. Almost any ortholinear keycap set will work fine. On this keyboard, I tried the Drop Dev TTY keycaps in MT3 profile. I liked the colorway, but I didn't like the profile. This was my first keyboard I ever built from a PCB, and I eventually sold it on Mech Market, and part of my soul went with it. But I had decided that I needed 2 more keys. For example, I used the command line a lot, so I missed not having a backslash key on my main layer. I also used the delete key often enough that I wanted a dedicated key for it. So I built a Lily58 keyboard. I kept the same layout as the Iris, however, as you can see, I now have the backspace key next to H, since I like that key there on the Xbo's keyboard. I have the delete key on the left half, it just seemed symmetrical that way, and it's also the way the truly ergonomic keyboard does it. This let me get my backslash key back, which is that blank key next to P. I went on the 3D Print My Thing subreddit and had these tenting legs printed in thermoplastic polyurethane, which is essentially rubber, so it worked well to prevent skidding. These are based on the tenting legs on Thingiverse, but with some modifications made to improve the stability of the keyboard. They tent each half of the keyboard to about 6.5 degrees, which is the angle I had on the Datadesk SmartBoard. Like the Iris, any ortholinear keycap set will fit on this keyboard. I bought the Mito Canvas XDA keycap set from Drop. This is a great uniform profile set, and the large surface area of the keycaps make them easy to hit. The only problem was that it does not include 1.5 unit space bars, but I picked up some G20 keycaps from PMK, which I think look great. I built this Lily58 using Kalebox Silent Brown switches, which is my favorite silent tactile switch. I also added some foam from little keyboards between the plate and the PCB, and I put sorbothane on the bottom of the case to further reduce noise. I really liked the Lily58. I liked it so much that I built a second one to keep at the office. And I would have been happy continuing to use this keyboard, but then Keebio announced their FoldKB keyboard. When I saw the Keebio FoldKB, I knew I had to try it out. The FoldKB is ortholinear, however, it was designed to use standard keycaps. This means you don't need to shop for group buys with ortholinear kits. You can use pretty much any standard keycap set. The trick is going to be finding matching split spacebars. The left spacebar is 2 unit, the same size as a backspace key, and the right spacebar is 2.75 unit, the same size as a right shift. You might be able to find a keycap set that includes those. I know Canon Keys sells some compatible sets, but they're usually only going to be found in spacebar or novelty kits in more expensive group buys. You can buy G20 keycaps from PMK. Unfortunately, it's going to be nearly impossible to get matching colors from different manufacturers. For example, even if you pick white keycaps and white space bars, one of them is likely to be more gray than the other. So if you go that route, your best bet is to pick a contrasting color like I did with the Lily58. So using VIA, I configured my FoldKB layout to match the Datadesk SmartBoard, so all the keys are where I expect to find them. The equals key is in the top left next to 1. The 6 key is on the right side. The control, function, windows, and alt keys on the left are in the exact positions that I was used to finding them on the Datadesk SmartBoard. I even have arrow keys. These keys on the lower right are dual function. For example, if you hold shift, it is shift, but if you tap it, it's up arrow. So these keys right here function as an inverted T arrow cluster, and they are right where I'm used to finding them. All the keys I use on a regular basis are available right on the keyboard. I really only need to use the function key if I want to access the F keys like F2 or F5, or if I need to use the number pad. I map the F keys to the number keys, so function plus 1 is F1, and all the way down to function plus 0 is F10, and these two keys are F11 and F12. When I need a number pad, I just hold function with my left hand, and these keys are my 10 key. I decided to use a modified happy hacking keyboard layout, so instead of a 2.75 right shift, I have a shortened right shift with a function key next to it. This lets me use the function key from either my left hand or my right hand. However, this is just one build option. You can build your FoldKB with a 2.75 right shift key. Instead of a 2-unit backspace key, I went with the build option to have 2 single-unit keys, which is where I put backslash and delete. However, you can certainly build this with a traditional 2-unit backspace key. The backspace key takes the place of the 1.5-unit backslash key. This puts it in the same row as P, which is where I had it on the Keebio Iris. So instead of having to move my hand 2 rows above the home row to reach backspace, I can just reach up and over 1 row. The control key takes the place of the caps lock key. So caps lock is a key that I rarely use, so I moved it to another layer. And having the control key here is very comfortable to use since my pinky doesn't have to stretch all the way to the bottom corner of the keyboard. It's just one column over, just like it is on my previous keyboards. A benefit of this layout is that the keys you normally hit with your pinky, like Tab, Control, Shift, and Enter, are larger instead of all one-unit keys like on the Iris and Lily58. The Home, Page Up, Page Down, and End keys are on the left. I assume this was done to keep the keyboard symmetrical, and it took me a couple of hours to get used to it, but it feels natural now. In short, using this keyboard was like hanging out with an old friend. Everything just matched up with the Datadesk SmartBoard, and muscle memory took over. I don't have the keyboard tented, but I found that it is just as comfortable to use untented with the sides further apart. If you build this keyboard, note that it only comes with top and bottom plates. Keebio does have case files on their GitHub, but you will need to either 3D print them yourself or find someone to print them for you. I recommend that you print the middle layer in a translucent material to allow the underglow LEDs to shine through. One build note is that Durock V2 stabilizers are a tight fit. They do fit without modification, but it's just something to be aware of. Also, the PCB is not hot swappable. You'll need to either solder the switches to the PCB or use Mil-Max sockets. I opted to solder my switches to the PCB. The PCB does allow per key LED, but you need to solder the LEDs in place. I built my keyboard with exactly one LED, which is under the escape key. I did this in case I wanted to add a cool artisan keycap later. I built this keyboard using Kalebox Silent Browns, which I already knew I was a fan of, and the board sounds really smooth and really dampened. So that's it for my review. I have been on a journey to find a worthy modern replacement for my Datadesk SmartBoard, and I think I finally found that with the Keebio FoldKB. The only issues I see myself having with this keyboard are admittedly self-inflicted. My custom layout means that a row 3 control, row 2 backspace, and row 1 backslash are only going to be found on more expensive group buys instead of the less expensive keycap sets. However, this was entirely my choice. It is totally possible to build this keyboard using standard keycaps. I might replace the keycaps at some point. Right now I've got GMK laser keycaps, but I recently joined the group buy for DSS Lightcycle and I'm looking forward to getting those. Other than that, I think I have finally reached the end of my keyboard journey and will stick with the FoldKB. At least for now. So if you liked this video or if it was helpful to you, please leave a like. If you have any suggestions for other videos, please leave a comment. Thanks for stopping by.